Go ahead.
Okay. Shemot in a nutshell. The children of Israel multiply in Egypt. Threatened by their growing numbers, Pharaoh enslaves them and orders the Hebrew midwives, Shifra and Puah, to kill all male babies at birth. When they do not comply, he commands his people to cast the Hebrew babies into the Nile. A child is born to Yocheved, the daughter of Levi, and her husband Amram, and placed in a basket on the river, while the baby's sister Miriam stands watch from afar. Pharaoh's daughter discovers the boy, raises him as her son, and names him Moses. As a young man, Moses leaves the palace and discovers the hardship of his brethren. He sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew and kills the Egyptian. The next day, he sees two Jews fighting. When he admonishes them, they reveal his deed of the previous day, and Moses is forced to flee to Midian. There, he rescues Jethro's daughter, marries one of them, Zipporah, and becomes a shepherd of his father in law's flocks.
Yep, here we go.
Yeah. God appears to Moses in a burning bush at the foot of Mount Sinai and instructs him to go to Pharaoh and demand, "Let my people go so that they may serve me." Moses' brother Aaron is appointed to serve as his spokesman in Egypt. Moses and Aaron assemble the elders of Israel to tell them that the time of their redemption has come. The people believe, but Pharaoh refuses to let them go and even intensifies the suffering of Israel. Moses returns to God to protest. Why have you done evil to this people? God promises that the redemption is close at hand.
So it gets worse before it gets better, which is not uncommon. And that's the theme of the parsha, that at the end, it seems like Moshe finally does agree to go to Pharaoh. And not only doesn't it help, but it makes it worse. And the portion ends up with a very powerful question. Why did you do bad to this people? Why did you send me? But for that, you have to come back next week to get the answer. Um, so that's the portion in a nutshell. There's a lot to talk about, even just beginning with the name of the book. But I think the best place to start is with Rashi, because Rashi is, well, the beginning of the verses, but we'll go to Rashi and the first Rashi just to give us some inspiration, and then we'll get into the specifics of the story and the specifics of the name of the book. But in any case, okay. So the problem with the opening, let me just read a few verses, and then we'll see what the issues here at hand are. Um, all right. Okay. The problem with the opening statement, before I tell you the problem, let's read the opening statement of the second book. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt. With Jacob, each man and his household came. And we have a list of the 12 sons of Jacob. And then it says, now all those descended from Jacob were 70 souls, and Joseph was in Egypt, meaning including Joseph. And then Joseph died, as well as all his brethren and all that generation. Children of Israel were fruitful and swarmed and increased and became very, very strong, and the land became filled with them. And then a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and then we have the story of the slavery. The problem with the opening statement of the verse, it's not a terrible problem, because you could say the beginning of the book you want to record, you want to repeat the history, but when it says these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt, this whole story is redundant. First of all, we know the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. It was written not last parsha, but two parshas ago in Vayigash, in the second to last story of Genesis. Second of all, they've been in Egypt for 17 years already. We're already reading about them in Egypt for two parshas, Vayigash and Vayichi, second to last of Genesis and last of Genesis. And we already said the 12 sons of Israel. And we already said that there were 70 souls. And we already listed all 70. Here is just an abridged version. You only have the 12 sons, and we say that all the families were 70. But all this is repeated. All this was said already. Why are you telling me the story again? So again, it's not a terrible question, because it's not, in other words, it's not so difficult, because you could say, we're starting the new book, we want to summarize. But it is strange to say, you could have just said the Jewish family is in Egypt. Listing the names is additional. We don't have to list the names. Listing the number, we don't have to list the number. We already know the number. And that seems to be the question that Rashi is addressing. What does Rashi say? Rashi says like this. Rashi says, although God counted them in their lifetime by their names, Genesis 46, two portions ago, we mentioned all 70 souls, including the 12 sons of Jacob. He counted them again after their death to let us know how precious they are to him, because they were likened to stars, which he takes out from beyond the horizon and brings in by number and by name, as it is said, who takes out their host by number, all of them he calls by name. In other words, Rashi is saying, why is God counting the name of the tribes of Israel? The key term is to let you know how precious they are. Not the best translation, l'hoidiachi basam, to let you know their love. When you love somebody, you always look for opportunities to count their names. So we're starting a new book of the Torah. What is God going to say? God is counting the children of Israel to say that they are beloved. Now, I think it could be that when you read the portion, you don't see the love. The love is hidden because we're talking about slavery and the Jewish people are enslaved. But Rashi is telling you right away that make no mistake, names, these are the names of the children of Israel. The names, well, I always like to say it's a very boring book it's a very boring name for a book, names. Because you buy a book, if you go to the store and you want to buy a book, names is a strange name. It doesn't tell you anything about it. Plus, it sounds boring. It sounds like it's just the yellow pages or white pages, even worse than the yellow pages. The yellow pages at least has some pictures and advertising. The white pages is just names. So you guys, I think, know what white pages are, but some people don't know. But you, I think, know what white pages are. So white pages, it doesn't sound like a beautiful name. By the way, the beginning of the first book of the Torah, Genesis. Oh, that's very intriguing. It's a great name, Bereshit, in the beginning, Genesis. Everybody wants to know what happened in the beginning. Very easy to catch people's attention. Now, in English from Greek, Exodus is an amazing name for the second book of the Torah. Exodus means there's drama, right? But we don't call it the book of Exodus in Hebrew. We call it the book of Shmot, the book of names. Where's all the drama? Couldn't we find a PR team to find a better name for this book so we could sell more copies? So Rashi is telling you that the name Shemot, the name names, is not a boring name because the name names implies love. And that's the theme. And that's the theme that the Torah is telling us that God's counting the names of the children of Israel, even though we'd already know that who they are. If you really want to know, look in the last parsha. But here we're saying it again. Why? To express love. So that's Rashi's opening statement to this parsha, giving you some um, inspiration to get through this parsha, because this parsha starts with slavery, and even though at the end of the parsha already hear about dispatching of Moshe, which is a nice thing, but we're still somehow stuck at the end of the parsha, and it gets worse before it gets better. So the Torah is saying, make no mistake. Rashi says the reason why we're mentioning names again, because that's the expression of love. Rashi says a similar theme also in the fourth book of the Torah, in the opening statement to the fourth book of the Torah, where again we list all the names. The book of Numbers, where we once again count the Jewish people in the desert. Rashi again says the same thing, that counting. There he doesn't say so much about names. There he says counting. What do you count? You count things that you love. If you have a collection, even if you know how many you have, you keep counting them. So this is a theme that Rashi comes back to in the second book and in the fourth book, numbers and names, which we think is boring. To Rashi says, if we're talking about it and you're listing it, it's because you love it. To somebody else, it's boring, right? Maybe somebody else doesn't want to know exactly how many, I don't know, grandkids you have or how many baseball cards you have or how many whatever. But to you, if it's meaningful, then you're going to count it and you're going to say it, even if to other people it seems boring. Go ahead, Roberta, please. How about you're on mute? We really want to hear you.
Just to clarify, the name of the Parsha is Shemot, and the name of
And
the
the book,
book?
both.
Oh,
Both.
wow.
Yeah, that's not uncommon. Bereshit is the Bereshit is the name of the first parsha, first book, and the first parsha. Shmot is the name of the first book, and each one, Bamidbar and Devarim. Yeah, each one of the five books, the first, the name of the first parsha is also the name of the book.
Mhm. That's interesting because y you wouldn't expect names to
Right.
be, for the Parsha, it's fine, but for the whole book,
Yeah, the whole book. Like I said, Exodus
it
is a much
doesn't
better
sound
name.
as grand as
Yeah,
it should be.
Exodus is a much better. Seems like a much better name, much more
Yeah,
drama.
yeah,
If you're making a movie about this, you wouldn't call it names, you'd call it Exodus.
right.
I think they did make a video movie called Exodus. Oh, what a coincidence.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So that's one point. And then there's something else that I say every year. You know what? Let's talk about this for a second. Rashi says the Rebbe always talk about this because the Rebbe loved the Jews, so the Rebbe always talked about it. So I'm going to talk about it also. Rashi talks about two issues. He talks about names and numbers. He counts them and he names them. And they're both expressions of love. When you love something, you name it. When you love something, you also count it. But if you want to get specific, and that's going to be a segue into the next point I want to make, is that both of these express love, but they work a little bit differently. Because when you say a number, what you're highlighting is what the group has in common. If I say I have 50, or in this case, 70 souls, so 70 people, you're highlighting all people, what they have in common. When you name the person, you're highlighting their individuality. And that's very different than a total of number. You do a census. The point is not to get the names of the people. They get that too because they're already collecting. Why not? But when you want the total, you want the number 70. You're not looking to find out the differences between the two. The whole idea of a number is to create a group and figure out how many people are in this group. So the number highlights what they have in common, and the name highlights how each one is distinct. And the Rebbe would always talk about how God, when he talks about the Jewish people, there is both aspects. There's what we all have in common, and that's the core of our soul. On the soul level, we're all one. And therefore, when you say God counts the Jewish people or counts people in general, but specifically in this case, the Jewish people, we're talking about the love that we have because of what we all have in common, the shared humanity, and the fact that we're all the children of God. And then there's also a love that comes from every person's individual, unique personhood. And every person is different. And there's a separate love that comes for the individuality. So does God like us for what makes us, unites us with other humans, or for how we distinguish ourselves? And the answer is, of course, both. So that is a little bit on what the rabbis talked about on the first Rashi. Now, one more point to going back to Roberta's point and the point I mentioned earlier, which is going to tie into what we said now. Seemingly, it's a strange name, names. It's just a strange name for the book. So if you want to zoom out for a second, and I think we alluded to this maybe on Friday, that there's a very big shift between the first book of the Torah and the second book. And the shift is that in the first book of the Torah, we're talking about individuals and we're talking about families. Even before you have Adam and Eve, we talk about their specific descendants. And then once you get to the patriarchs and matriarchs, we're talking about families. In this book, we're no longer a family. In this book, we become, in the language of Pharaoh, we're an Am, we are a people. So we're shifting now from individual people, maneuvering in the first book for a good few hundred years. If you start from Abraham till now, is 200 years, yeah. And if you talk about this book, so it's a family, individuals, and now we're going to becoming a nation. It is interesting that the first person who called us a nation was the Pharaoh, and that could be a little bit of anti-Semitism or xenophobia in a way. Basically, he says they are their own people, they have their own allegiances and their own loyalties, and they're not going to be loyal to Egypt, right? So instead of framing us as loyal citizens to Egypt, they say they're their own people. And you don't have to go back to Pharaoh. You can turn on your Twitter today and you'll see many people saying the same thing today. So these ideas are just recycled. They keep resurfacing. But the reality is that numbers tell the story, and we're no longer a people. We're no longer a small family. We are people. We're a large number. We are people with large numbers. The Torah itself says, "Bnei Israel paru." They were fruitful. Vayishrutzu. They teemed. Our numbers skyrocketed. What's the danger? Now, it's a beautiful thing that when your family grows and you become a people, it's a wonderful thing. What is the danger? The danger of becoming a people is that the individual feels that I am not that important anymore. I'm just a number. I'm just one of a larger group, right? Right? With Abraham, if Isaac would not want to carry his legacy, maybe there would be nobody to carry the legacy, right? So the stakes are high. And with even Jacob has 12 sons, they understand they have to step up, and each one has their own gift to contribute to this family. And your family needs you, and you need to show up for the family. And sometimes it took them time to learn that lesson, but eventually they all learned that lesson. When you talk about a people, so God has 14 million people eating matzah on Passover. He needs me to eat matzah on Passover, right? All the shuls are full. Everybody buys the seats. You can't buy an extra seat in any Jewish synagogue on Yom Kippur this year. Do I have to go to shul? I could stay home. I'm not important. That's the danger when you think about becoming a people. And here, what the Torah is going to tell you is that specifically when we're moving and shifting from becoming from an individual family to a nation, the Torah emphasizes God thinks of us as names. God thinks of us as individual people. And if you look at every story in this, at all the major stories and many of the other stories in the second book of the Torah, which you would think it's talking about peoplehood, we're talking about we can't think about the individual because we're worried about the collective. You see that the stories of the individuals keep coming up because the individual doesn't lose their importance just because it's a collective. And maybe that's why the names is very important. It is the drama. The drama is that even though you're becoming a people, you could retain the attention and the significance of every individual. And that is a dramatic statement because that's very difficult to do. And that's where many societies fail, but God doesn't fail and Moses doesn't fail. And Moses' test is that he runs after, one sheep and he goes after, tries to step into help one individual, etc. So that is something to be said for the idea of names, that it's very hard to maintain names when you grow. Growing is a problem. If I'm not being recorded, I think I am. Maybe I should stop the recording. There's a problem when Chabad, God willing, is not God willing. Chabad, thank God, it grew. And we used to be in a very small space, and now we're in a very large space, and now the space is going to be renovated with God's help, and growth is an amazing thing. But there's also a challenge to growth. The challenge to growth is you don't necessarily feel as homey as it used to be in the old days at Mason Street when we had to, you had to, push around to set up the tables for the kiddush, and everybody was rubbing shoulders and crashing into each other. And there's a certain feeling of family that when you have a large building and many more people, it's hard to maintain. Now, the Rebbe always taught you have to grow, and you should grow, and because you need to accommodate more people. But the challenge is, and that's also the empowerment of this parsha, is that when you are growing, not to lose the feeling of every individual matters. And that's why what I'm trying to say is every movement has to deal with this, right? You had when the Rebbe started Chabad in America in 1950, there were 10 students, there were 15 students. My grandfather was, with the previous Rebbe, my grandfather was one of the first 10 students of the yeshiva. The previous Rebbe came to America in 1940, and he would not go to sleep in his hotel room until they told him that they're starting a yeshiva in the United States. So he wouldn't go to sleep, but he needed students. So they got a few students. So one of the students was my grandfather. The point here is when you had a very small and intimate group, it was very easy to feel important and feel significant and feel like you're critical. But then when you grow and you're now a movement of thousands and tens of thousands, it's a very big challenge. And every movement has to deal with this. When you scale something up too big, you lose some of the significance of every individual. And that's why this is the real drama. The real drama is names. Could you treat every person as a name, even when you're shifting from family to people? And the answer is absolutely yes. That's what we have to do, and that's what we do. But the point is, this is in a way more dramatic than Exodus, moving people from slavery to freedom. That's easy in comparisons. To be able to have tens of thousands of people of much large numbers and convey to each person that God is speaking to you as an individual, that's the drama. That's very difficult. And the sages make this point. I could point this out as we go throughout the book. The best example is in the Ten Commandments when we have all the Jewish people. And the sages say not just all the Jewish people who were alive then, but all the souls of all the future Jewish people and all the converts. So we're talking about, I don't know the numbers, millions of people, millions of souls. They're all at Sinai. And what does God say? What's the opening statement to the Ten Commandments? Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am the Lord your God. Now, in English, you lose it, but in the Hebrew, you could say you are as individual, or you could say you are as plural. You could say you're singular or you're as plural. And we don't say Anochi Hashem Elokechem, I'm the Lord your God in plural. But God says, I'm the Lord your God in individual. And Rashi quotes the sages who say that every person said and considered that God is speaking to me. Because God didn't speak in the plural, God spoke in the singular. Right? So God can do that. We have to emulate God. But the point is, all I'm trying to do here is dramatize and say, this is a big deal. To be in the book of the peoplehood and name the book of peoplehood names, that's a big deal. That's a big drama. That's a big thing. That's very difficult to do. Okay, so that's the point, but I want to say one more thing about names because this is really fun, and I only discovered it last year. I didn't discover it myself. I read it. Maybe I said it last year. Could be I said it last year. I don't remember. But either way, it's fun. Hopefully, somebody will remind me if I said it last year. Stop for l'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niv'dvarei. Okay, so far so good. I didn't say anything too provocative. Everybody's happy. Very good. I don't want to shake the boat too much. Okay. We talked about this when you talk about the three sons of Noah. Noah has three sons. One is Shem, one is Ham, one is Yafet. The name of the oldest one is the oldest one, yeah. Yeah. Shem was the oldest. I'm pretty sure Shem was the oldest. I think there's a debate whether Shem was the oldest or not. I think, but either way, probably Shem was the oldest. Shem means name. What is name? What does the name mean? So you could look at a name as just a convenience. We have people. We have to differentiate what we have to differentiate how to classify and how to refer to something. So you say this is your name. But in biblical Hebrew, many people believe that Shem is much more than just a name. Your name is basically what is your purpose? In other words, when you classify something and you have a piece of wood and you say, this is no longer a piece of wood, we're going to give it its own name. This is called a table, right? So you're not just finding a new way to refer to something, but you're actually giving this object its purpose. And Shem is very much connected to purpose in biblical Hebrew. So when you say Noah's oldest son is Shem, it's because Noah's oldest son was concerned with purpose. What is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of things? And compare that to Noah's other sons. Noah had another son called Yafet. Yafet means beautiful. What's beauty? What's beautiful? That's your name, beautiful? Yeah, it's nice to have a beautiful, it's nice that your name is beautiful. But what it means is he was concerned with beauty, with art, with music, with science. He was looking for beauty. And Ham was looking for passion. Ham means hot, passion. So you could divide the human experience really into three general categories. And we all get this, we get this from Noah's three sons. There's passion, excitement, or pleasure, right? That's cham. Well, a more physical pleasure. That's cham. That's the physical passions. You have we're looking for more beauty. We're looking for beauty, and we're also looking for meaning. That's shame. The point is, shame is meaning. Okay. When you say these are the names, meaning these are the names of the children of Israel, the names represent meaning. What is interesting is that if you look at chapter 2 of the book of Exodus, and it's actually very funny, there are no names. There are no names. We talk about people, individual people, but there are no names. And what does that tell you? That tells you we're in exile because chapter 2 is the difficult part of exile. Once Pharaoh already commanded to drown the Jewish babies in the Nile. So the exile and the persecution is intense. And part of exile is not just that you're a slave and you're working for other people, but part of exile is you don't have your own identity, you don't have your own purpose, you're serving someone else's purpose. And that's why when you want to talk about what is spiritual slavery, there are no names. And I'm going to show this to you because it's actually pretty amazing. I think it's a lot of fun to read, but just to see. Now, this is something that I should have maybe noticed many years ago, but I never noticed. But last year, I read it somewhere and it was pointed out, and it was so beautiful. So let's go. I'm just giving an example. This is an absurd verse. A man of the house of Levi went and married the daughter of Levi. Exodus chapter 2. Now, it happens to be that we know exactly who the man is and we know who the woman is. How do we know? Not because we're so smart, because in the next parsha, the Torah tells us who this is. This happens to be Moshe's mother and father. And we're going to hear about this later. But in chapter 2, which is the most difficult part of the slavery, there's no names. So it says a man married a daughter of Levi. Levi's her great grandfather. Levi's not her father. So Levi is the tribe. So a man from the tribe of Levi married a daughter of the tribe of Levi. Tell me his name. No, there's no names. Next, the woman conceived and bore a son. What's the son's name? We don't know yet. We're going to hear about that later, right? But who's the woman? We don't know. Okay. Who's the son? We don't know. There are no names. Next, this gets even better. When she could no longer hide him, she took for him a reed basket, smeared it with clay and pitch, placed the child. What's the child's name? Now we know that he had a name. Maybe his name wasn't Moshe yet because he wasn't put into the Nile yet. He wasn't drawn from the Nile. But Moshe had 10 names. His mother gave him a name at birth. No name. And then it gets even funnier. His sister stood from afar. What's the sister's name? We know it's Miriam. We're going to hear about it later. Here we don't know who that is. No name. Gets even worse. Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe. Who's Pharaoh's daughter? What's the daughter's name? Oh, we're going to hear about that later in a different book. Her name is Batya. Not here, right? There are no names. You see, so you could miss this, but once you hear this idea and you start reading verse after verse after verse, there's man, there's woman, there's wife, there's sister, there's daughter. We have everything, except we don't have the names of the people. She opened it and she saw him the child. And it's not only that we don't have names. His sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, again, should I call the mother? And she called the child's mother. Again, it's just you see once you see it, you can't unsee it. It seems to be pretty clear that the Torah is not the Torah is not saying any names here because a name is individual, and slaves don't have an individual identity, but even spiritual. Slavery means that I cannot express my own purpose. And it's interesting because the first thing Moshe tells, we're going to read about the burning bush later in this parsha, when when God comes to Moshe and says, you take the Jews out of Egypt, and Moshe says, what are you talking? You're God? The first thing that's going to happen, I'm going to come to the Jewish people, I'm going to say, God sent me. They're going to ask me, what is his name? What's the difference what God's name is? If God wants to take you out, someone comes to you and said, "Oh, the CEO of this company is giving you $1 million." You're going to say, "What's the name of the CEO?" That doesn't seem so important. But no, the whole story here is about names. What is the purpose? Name is purpose. What is the purpose in what God is doing? What is the purpose of the slavery? What is the purpose of God treating us this way? So the point here is that if you look at it, you see that slavery is the lack of name. So in the beginning, we highlight the names: Reuven, Shimon, all the sons of Jacob. They all had names, and then we lose the names, and we don't get the names back until you move to freedom, and that's regaining your name, regaining your personal identity, regaining your personal purpose. So that's something that's subtle, but it's in the name and in the name of the parsha and the name of the book. So it is significant, even though we're used to thinking of names as boring. A name is just the white pages, but no, there is serious significance in the word name and in calling the book names and the lack of names that we're going to read about in chapter 2, and then the regaining of the names that we're going to read about later. All this is significant. Okay. Go ahead, Roberta, please. You're muted. You're muted.
Doesn't Hashem mean the name?
Hashem means the name. In the Torah, it's interesting. God has many names, 7 names in the Torah, Hashem not being one of them. Only in the 5th book of the Torah does God refer I'm sorry, let me take it back. Only in the 5th book of the Torah does Moshe refer to God as the name. But the name is a title, it's not a name. Because God doesn't have one name. And why doesn't God have one name? One of the reasons why God doesn't have one name is because God doesn't have a definition. You ask me what's my purpose, you could define it. You ask me what's someone else's purpose, you could define. What is God's purpose? There is no definition to God. So that's why there's the hesitation to give God's name. And the God has multiple names because God expresses himself in multiple ways, but there is no one name that could define him. The only name, the Zohar says, the only thing that defines name, God, is when God says, I am the Lord your God. Lord is a name, God is a name. But I, Anochi, defies any description. And the Zohar says that the first word of the Ten Commandments, Anochi, that's the essence of God. Because the names do not express the essence. I expresses the essence. Why? Because it is not captured with the name. Because every name is a description. There's no way to get around that. But a description is a definition, and people need definition. We need a definition. What is my purpose? What am I supposed to be doing? Robbing a person of the name is robbing the person of their own individuality and their own individual purpose and definition. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. I had a similar question about the king that arose. He also doesn't have a name. So the Pharaoh, is it a title, or this is
Yeah.
and
Pharaoh is a title. Pharaoh is a title. All the pharaohs, we know this from history also, but in the Torah also, all the pharaohs going back to Abraham, the king of Egypt in Abraham's times was Pharaoh. So Pharaoh is the name of the king, regardless of the person's individual name. And in a way, when you become the king, you lose your individual name because it's not you. You're becoming something different. You're becoming the Pharaoh. You know. So, but you're right here too. It Mayakub al Chadash doesn't say the name also. So maybe Pharaoh himself is lost. In other words, when you're enslaving others, it's really moving away from who you really truly are, right?
Or you don't differentiate between different kings. They
Right.
all kind of fall into the same category. It doesn't matter what the name is.
Because in a way, you're an expression, the king is an expression of the culture. And you could blame the king and say the king was so terrible. But on the other hand, the king is only so terrible because that's what the culture, those are the values that the culture puts forth. So if it would be someone else, the king would, everything would be so different, right? What would happen if there's a big debate when you talk about history of how important this is a debate, I don't have the answer, but there is a debate about in history how important are the individual figures? You know, if there wasn't Churchill in the Second World War, would Britain stand up to the Nazis? Maybe yes, maybe no. The argument for yes is you need a special person at the right time. The argument for no is that person is only expressing a certain energy that's within the population. And if it wouldn't be with this person, somebody else would have stepped up. If not then, a few days later, you know. So the point is, I'm not taking a side on this debate, but the point here is that there is an argument to be made that Pharaoh is just the embodiment of the culture. It's not about him; it's the embodiment of the culture. And if Pharaoh ignores Joseph, it's because the culture ignores Joseph, right? So there there's it's hard to separate the people and the leadership, even in a dictatorship where people don't have the right to vote. At the end of the day, the king, in some ways, the king embodies, at least in the beginning. Eventually, there's going to be a lag between the people turning away and how long it will take for the dictator to fall. So there is sometimes a lag, but at the end of the day, Pharaoh can rise and do something because the people will tolerate it. And in that sense, it's not an individual; it's the person embodying the collective.
Right. Thank you. So even if it says new, maybe it doesn't even mean new because they just ignore what Joseph did and just ignore
It's
Jewish.
a debate in the Talmud about new. Is it new, or was it someone who acted like it was new? So there's a debate, and Rashi quotes a debate, Rav and Shmuel. There's a debate about the word new, and there's a broader debate. Yeah, there's a broader debate, but there's a debate about the word new. So it could be new policies means a new king, right? If you wanted the person who says that it wasn't a new king, he just says it's a new policy. So we don't care about the king. The king doesn't matter. The policies matter, right? So when you say a new pharaoh, new king, you don't whether or not it's the same person biologically, yes or no, who cares? Nobody cares. Cares new king means new policies. Okay. Um So very quickly at the beginning, I want to just pace myself. We have 22 minutes left. I want to talk a little bit about the difficulty of the slavery and then then about the burning bush and God coming to Moshe to redeem the people. We have to also end with positivity. So let's do 10 minutes maybe about the slavery, or at least no more than 10 minutes. And I mentioned this in the past, but I think this is also very beautiful. So I want to do this very, very briefly, but it is really beautiful in my opinion. There is this whole discussion here. So we have the discussion how they became slaves. I don't know if I want to get into it right now. Either way, that's verse 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, the slaves. And then, so Pharaoh enslaves the people and he thinks, see, the problem is like this. Let's read the problem. Let's read, if you want to get into the mind frame of Pharaoh and see what he did, why he did what he did. He said to his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel, that's the key. Am means a nation. The nation of the children of Israel. When you call them children of Israel, Bnei Israel, that could be a family. Children of Israel, they're children of an individual. But he refers to them as Am, a nation of the children of Israel. They're their own nation. So they're numerous and stronger than we are. They're stronger than us. Get ready, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they increase and a war befall us, and they join our enemies and wage war against us and depart from the land. Depart from the land, according to Rashi, means not that the Jews will depart from the land, but they will cause the natives, they'll cause the Egyptians, they'll throw us out of the land. So basically, the numbers grow too big. There's a threat. The threat is they're increasing too big, and they're a danger. So therefore, he says, let's outsmart them. How are we going to outsmart them? So you read that in verse 11. So they appointed over them tax collectors to afflict them with their burdens, and they built store cities for Pharaoh, namely Pithom and Ramses. They forced them to be slaves. How exactly that went down is another story. The problem is, what's the plan? What's the purpose of the policy of slavery? Not so much to build the homes, but the point not to build the cities. The point is to decrease the population. The problem is the Torah says, verse 12, but as much as they would afflict them, so did they multiply and so did they gain strength. And they were disgusted because of the children of Israel. We could talk about there's a subtlety here. What does disgusted mean by Yakutsu? I don't want to get into that right now. The bottom line is the plan doesn't work. The slavery was introduced in order to control the growth of the Jewish population, and it does not control the growth. So now we need another plan. So now we get to the next plan. The next terrible plan is Pharaoh calls the midwives and says, kill the males. And that doesn't either work because they don't listen. They defy Pharaoh. And later, Pharaoh has another decree, tells the Egyptians to throw the children into the Nile. But it all comes from the problem that what Pharaoh is afraid is of the increase in the numbers. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Well, just a couple of questions. First of all, how did Jews tolerate the taskmasters were appointed? I mean, this is even contradicts the hierarchy, the other Egyptians, because other Egyptians didn't have taskmasters. They were all like, they serving one king.
Right.
Nobody between the king and the regular Egyptian citizen. And the second question is, there is a pharaoh, and then Ramses. Is it the names of the?
Ramses is the name of cities. We know from the history that Ramses is also the name of the pharaoh. There's a historians debate whether which pharaoh was in the era that we're discussing. I think it's Ramses III. Many people believe so. Ramses is the name of the pharaoh, but from the Torah's perspective, it's the name of the city. Now that was not uncommon to name cities for people. You have that where you come from. We have Leningrad, we have Stalingrad, we have Petersburg, we have in here we have Washington. What else do we have? We have Washington, D.C., we have Carolina. I'm sure there's many other states and countries that the city is for the person.
What about my first question? How come?
Oh, so the way the Medrash puts it is that initially, how do you get people to be enslaved? Initially, I think I mentioned this in the past. There's a volunteer. They put out a national project. Everyone's going to come volunteer, and then slowly but surely, the Egyptians drift away, but the Hebrews are forced to stay there. There's a subtlety here that some people explain as follows: when it says Vayasimu alav sarei misim, he appointed over them tax collectors. So somehow, I'm just trying to think. I didn't read this in a while, but
Taskmasters,
the tax collectors were only upon them. In other words, everybody was doing the labor. You see, so everyone's doing the labor, but but I have to look at the Kli Yakar talks about this a lot. So also, what's the outsmarting? Outsmarting means everyone's going to work. So the Egyptians are also going to work. So we have to. So that's the conspiracy. But the conspiracy, the difference is going to be that they placed over them Allah is not over them. Allah is over him, individual. Allah, vayasimu Allah. They pointed over him or it, meaning not them, meaning only part of them, only it, only the Jewish people. So that's the shift. So we can. That's what the Medrash says. I don't have much more to say about that.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ben, please.
Why did they kill the males and not the females? If you want to reduce the population, kill the ones that deliver the babies.
That's a very good question. The Rashi says like this. Rashi says that Pharaoh is afraid, not so much of the stargazers tell him he has this intuition that the Jewish people, there's going to be a leader that's going to redeem them. And he's really afraid of the next level of the next generation of Jewish leadership. And in those days, the leaders were the males, so he's afraid of the males. Another interpretation is that that's also a subtlety, but he tells later, the other interpretation is that for whatever reason, it was easier to assimilate women than men, because men were very associated with their tribe. But the woman, he felt, is not such a threat because it would be easier to assimilate them into Egypt. So in that sense, those are the two things I could think of. But it's clear what I'm saying. What I'm saying that he's going after the males. That is clear. That he says that specifically. So the males. Maybe I can even argue a third interpretation, which is what is he afraid? He's afraid that when a war comes, they will come and attack us. And there'll be what a fifth column. Who is he afraid of? He's not afraid of the women in war. He's afraid of the males in war. So you have to really think about what exactly he was afraid of, and maybe that will explain why the females were less of a threat.
Right, but then it's not just population; it's something else.
Correct. But maybe male population growth, or whatever. Right. But it does say that. Look, see, I'm working. I'm working with what the verses are telling me, which you see before you. I don't have anything that you don't have, right? It says clearly that he tells his people we're afraid of the numbers, right? And then it says it didn't help; they were still multiplied. And then he tells his people, so he's afraid of numbers. That I have to deal with. We also know in a minute you'll see that as we I've alluded to it, but it's in the verses that he tells them just to kill the males. So you have to come up with some interpretation that will incorporate both of those ideas. So I'm constrained by what the verses are telling me. I could make my own story, but that's not interesting. You didn't hear to come. You didn't come here to hear my story. Okay, Roberta, go ahead.
Yeah, so why would Pharaoh think that the midwives were Hebrew, that they would follow his directions and kill the children?
Because he's a pharaoh. He's a dictator.
But
Everyone listens to the pharaoh. Okay, let me continue what Roberta's saying. And I said this, I think I said this in the past, but it's very beautiful. What happens is like this, that we have this whole back and forth between Pharaoh and the two midwives, which seems to be a distraction. It doesn't matter. What do I have to know about this? One of the reasons why it's a distraction is because it doesn't work. Pharaoh called two midwives and said, kill all the males. They don't listen. So he comes up with a better plan. Tell the Egyptians to kill the males. And that works much better. So why do I need this whole interaction? There's many verses about this interaction. You want to see how many verses there are? As follows. There is 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 4 verses, or 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 verses, 6 verses, 7 verses. This is crazy. There are 7 verses about this interaction between Pharaoh and the midwives, the Hebrew midwives, and seemingly we don't need it. It's an utter failure, right? Later, his other plan unfortunately works. He calls verse 22. Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, "Every son who is born you shall cast into the Nile, and every daughter you shall allow to live." But what are we talking about all of this? What do I have to hear about the midwife? So let me read this very quickly, and let me say what I want to say because I really want to say it, and you're kind enough to listen. Okay, here we go. Verse 15. Now the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one who was named Shifra, and the second who was named Puah. Hey, why the names? I just told you there are no names in the story of slavery. We'll get to that in a minute. Most people say the name is not Shifra and Puah because we think they're Yocheved and Miriam, Moses' mother and sister. They think these are the titles, and these are the titles of the midwives. But either way, it does say 2 names here. And he said, when you deliver the Hebrew woman and you see on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall put him to death. If it is a daughter, she may live. The midwives, however, feared God. So they did not do as the king of Egypt had spoken to them, but they enabled the boys to live. Pharaoh is not happy. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing that you have enabled the boys to live?" And the midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are skilled as midwives, literally chayot, their life." People say maybe it comes from the wild animal. They live in the wild. They don't need midwives. They can give birth by themselves. Either way, when the midwife has not yet come to them, they have already given birth. They say, well, the midwives become too late. God benefited the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. Now it took place when the midwives feared God that he made houses for them, meaning dynasties. And we believe that Moshe and Aaron and the priesthood and the kingship comes from Moshe's sister. Either way, okay, you have a lot of energy here about a plan that doesn't end up working. So if you're asking me and you want to save space, I take out these 6 verses. It's irrelevant. Like Roberta says, it was a bad idea to begin with. He thinks the Hebrew midwives are going to kill all the boys. It's ridiculous. And indeed, it fails. So then he goes to the Egyptians. But there's a beautiful interpretation, and the beautiful interpretation goes like this. This story is critical. And it ties into what I said the other day on Friday. And we could talk about this. There's no way to become free. The only way to become free is if you defy the Pharaoh. And in other words, we talked about this on Friday, that if the Jewish people would leave with the permission of Pharaoh and not defying Pharaoh, they're still enslaved. Yesterday, Pharaoh said you're enslaved. Now Pharaoh says go free. You're only going free because Pharaoh told you to go free. So in the final analysis, you're still working for Pharaoh. Yesterday, he told you to be in the prison cell. Today, he's telling you to be outside of the prison cell. You're still listening to him. To be free, you have to defy Pharaoh. Who defies Pharaoh? Moshe defies Pharaoh. Eventually, in this parsha, the Jewish people do not defy Pharaoh. That's why they're still stuck in Egypt. There's a breakdown that happens at the end of the parsha, which we discussed on Sundays. This parsha, Moshe eventually goes, the people don't defy Pharaoh. So we're still stuck in Egypt. But who defies Pharaoh? Moshe's mother. And then you say, where does Moshe come from? How does Moshe have this within himself to stand up to Pharaoh? You need an origin story. What's the origin story? Moshe's mother. Who is Moshe's mother? The midwife. Because the sages say that's Yocheved and Moshe's sister. So you want to say, where does Moshe come from? Where does freedom come from? It's the act of defiance. Now it's very small act. It's not a small act of defiance. To defy the Pharaoh is very dangerous. But the point is, it doesn't really move the plot forward because the decree happened anyway. All the Jewish males were in danger of death anyway. So their act of defiance didn't really change anything in the plot. It did because Moshe had to be put in the Nile. But the point is, you could have had this story. This story would continue just as fine without the story of the midwives. But no, the story of the midwives must be there because we have to say that even amidst the slavery, even when people forgot their names, and this is why I'm saying Shifra and Pua both have names. There are two people, two women who retain their identity. They know their purpose. They know that they're not slaves. They know they have freedom of choice. And they stand up to Pharaoh. And now it's not a surprise. It happens to be one of their sons is Moshe. The other son is Aaron. But the point here is we're telling you that even amongst the terribly dark slavery, there are at least some people who were able to stand up for who they are and stand up to the Pharaoh and defy the Pharaoh because essentially they were still internally free people. And that's Moshe's biological mother. Now it happens to be Moshe's adopted mother also defies Pharaoh because that's the daughter of Pharaoh who saves the Hebrew child, even though Pharaoh said, kill all the Hebrew children. So Moshe gets this idea of defying Pharaoh and the spirit and the freedom and the spirit of freedom and the spirit of do what you think is right. Moshe gets it arguably both from his biological mother and from his adopted mother. So that's the beauty of the story. It goes both ways. It's not just biological. It's not just the mother who raised him. It's both. And that's why once you look at it from that lens, yes, this story of standing up to Pharaoh is actually very important, and it does make the difference, and it does tell us about who Moshe will become. So that is a little bit about the story of the midwives and the decree, and then we want to think about what's the next story we want to talk about because we don't have all that much time. We could talk a little bit about the burning bush. We could talk about Moshe himself. Okay. One of the issues here, I mentioned before that we don't say the name. A man of the house of Levi went and married the daughter of Levi. Doesn't say the names of Aaron's parents. And we mentioned that we said, well, because they're slaves, they don't have a name, or the name is hidden. But there are other interpretations that say as follows. They say that if we would give you Moshe's parents' name right now, we know who they are. We'll hear about them, I believe, in Exodus chapter 6. So next parsha we'll hear about it. But if you would give them the name right now, what would the takeaway be? You would say Moshe rose to greatness because he had great parents. Because Amram was a prominent person in the community, tribe of Levi, which was a prominent tribe, but Amram specifically was a prominent person. And here you have the lineage of Moshe, and therefore the reason why Moshe achieved greatness was because of his lineage. And the Torah keeps, according to this interpretation, the Torah specifically keeps the name of Moshe's parents vague and does not tell you who they are, to tell you that what made Moshe unique and special and worthy of leadership and worthy of being the one to take the Jews out of exile was not the lineage. It was not the lineage. The lineage is not important. Everything in Exodus is about the lineage, in Genesis is about the lineage, where there has to be a son who's going to carry the legacy, and which son is it going to be? Is it going to be this son? Is it going to be that son? But here we downplay the lineage. And the reason, because what makes Moshe is the character traits. What specific character traits? So the Torah doesn't tell you why Moshe was selected. If you say, why was Moshe selected? God comes to Moshe at the burning bush and says, you go to Egypt. Why you go to Pharaoh? Why you? Why Moshe? Moshe seems to be a very bad candidate. He himself insists that he's not a good person to do this. I can't speak. I have a stutter. I'm heavy of lips and heavy of tongue. I can't speak. Heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. I can't speak. So why is he chosen? The Torah doesn't tell you why he was chosen. Later, the Torah tells you other qualities of Moshe, that he was very humble. That you're going to hear later in the Torah. But right now, when you're reading this book for the first time, the first question you're going to ask yourself is, what was unique about Moshe? Did he come from a prominent family? We don't know. It doesn't say his parents' name. So why was he chosen? So it doesn't say why he was chosen. But it alludes to it. What does it allude to? It alludes to it in the stories of Moshe. So there were a few stories about Moshe in Exodus before he was chosen. I believe beginning in Exodus chapter 3. No, not even in chapter 3. In chapter 2. In chapter 2, we have 3 stories about Moshe. What are the stories of Moshe? You know the stories. I'm just going to repeat them. I'm just going to allude to them. The first story is that Moshe sees that there's an Egyptian striking a Jew, and Moshe intervenes and kills the Egyptian. Story 1. The next day, 2 Jews are fighting, and Moshe intervenes and tells the one who's about to hit his friend, wicked one, why are you hitting your friend? And the third story is Pharaoh hears that he killed the Egyptian, so Moshe has to flee because Pharaoh wants to kill Moshe. Moshe flees, goes to Midian, and in Midian he comes to the well because that's where you go. You don't go to Starbucks because there's no Starbucks. So you're in the desert. So where do you go? Where is the center of town? The center of town is not Saks Fifth Avenue. The center of town is the well. So he comes to the well, and there he sees that all the male shepherds are picking on and oppressing the female shepherds. There was a few female shepherds, the daughters of Jethro, and he stands up and he protects them, and he waters their sheep. And then they go home, and the father said, why'd you come home so fast? He said, well, an Egyptian man saved us. He says, what? An Egyptian man helped you and you didn't bring him home? Bring him home. Maybe he'll marry one of you. And that's what happens. He brings him home, and they get the shidduch going between Moshe and Zipporah. The point is, so you could see nice stories. But if you zoom out for a second and you see what do these stories have in common? What they have in common is Moshe is incapable of seeing somebody being oppressed without stepping in. Moshe is stepping in for the oppressed in all 3 stories. And you want to say, why does Moshe get the job? Because that's how he lives his life. And because he lives his life, he's the perfect person to step in and save the people, the collective people, from their oppression, because Moshe, on an individual basis, looks at individual people that way. And then there's a beautiful interpretation that says, as you look at these 3 stories, these 3 stories are really a progression. Because if you think about which story is the easiest for Moshe to step in, so it gets harder and harder, in a sense that it's easier to protect someone from your group against an outside person, right? An outside threat, it's us against them. It's natural for people to protect the members of their own group. So here you have an Egyptian striking a Jew. So Moshe sees himself as a Jew, which is interesting in itself. But it does say, because Moshe grew up in Pharaoh's palace, but it does say he went out to see his brethren. So he understood that biologically he's related to the Jews, and he considered them his brethren. And then he sees someone on the outside striking the Jew. So he protects the Jew. Okay, that's commendable, but that's a little bit easier. The second step is even harder. You have 2 Jews fighting. So you don't have that threat of someone outside my group fighting someone within my group. In my group, they fight each other. Who cares? It's not my problem. And yet, even within his group, Moshe steps in and to protect. And the hardest thing is the third story. Because the third story is Moshe comes to Midian. He's a stranger. It's not protecting someone else, a member of his own group, from either an outside threat or a member of the same group. Here there are 2 people not in his group. It's the other. You have the others are fighting with each other. You have the Midianite men oppressing the Midianite women. It's not my problem. I'm a Hebrew. I'm an Egyptian. I have nothing to do with this. Why am I getting involved? So you have all the incentive in the world not to get involved, and Moshe consistently gets involved in all these three stories. And if the Torah doesn't tell you what Moshe's credentials, the Torah doesn't tell you explicitly, but it's possible that this is what the Torah is alluding to. These are the credentials. The credentials is that this is someone who steps in and when he sees suffering. And that's what makes Moses. And that's why Moshe, and that's why you don't have to say why God chose Moshe. It's obvious. If you read the stories, you know it's obvious why Moshe was chosen. These stories are his credentials. So that's a little bit about the Parsha. There's so much more to say and so much more to discuss. But this is a story in short, just to wet the tongue. It's only Tuesday, so you have another couple of days to read till Shabbos. And God should give us many years to be able to study Torah in good health. And thank you all for joining. See you, God willing, in the future in good health.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everybody.